Hello there guys, and welcome to another one of my reviews. Today we are talking about probably the last generation Ford Focus, and it's going to be a shame to see this car go. The reason I'm saying that is because we are inside the Mark IV facelift version, and recently some Ford officials have said that this will be the last one made, because starting with 2025 it will go out of production and they will not make a successor for it. Basically, we'll see possibly an electric version launched, but the naming might be different, so it might have a different name, a different shape. We'll see. If we're to look at the rivals this car has, it's clear to see that they've gone in different directions. So I'm talking about the Golf here and about the Renault Megane. While the Golf seems to be replaced by the Volkswagen ID.3, which has a completely different design, a completely different setup and so on, Renault went the other way around. They kept the name, it's still called the Renault Megane. They made an electric car, but it still has a completely different design, completely different approach, one more fitted to the electric drivetrain of that car. We'll have to wait and see what Ford has in store for the Focus. But in the meantime, let's talk about this car specifically. Well, the Focus has been a success story for Ford, especially in Europe. The car was created in the 90s to rival already established names like the Volkswagen Golf or the Opel Astra or any other of the French rivals in the segment back then. And it did so very successfully, even though it went in a uphill struggle, to be fair, because the rivals it had were already established name, and this was an American car trying to make its way in Europe in the 90s. So it wasn't easy, but they did it. So we arrive at the fourth generation, which was launched, coincidence or not, exactly 20 years after the original came out in 1998. So since 4 years had passed in 2022, the fourth generation Focus got a facelift late last year, which brought a couple of interesting changes, but nothing radical whatsoever. The platform remains the same. It's the same Ford C2 platform that was introduced on the fourth generation Focus initially. But we have seen some technical changes and some slight design upgrades. For example, the front end now has slightly reshaped headlamps, a slightly different grille, and a bigger badge, Ford badge embedded in it instead of positioned above it. Those are all slight tweaks done to keep the car relevant. The same goes for the rear end, where you'll notice a slight tweak for the tail lamps, a new technology, LED technology for lighting them up, and that's about it. We still have the Focus nameplate on the boot lid over there in the back. So no huge differences, but there have been some changes done under the hood. Now, in most markets around Europe, you will only have a handful of choices for your drivetrain. Mainly focused on the 1-liter EcoBoost engine, petrol engine that has been introduced on the Focus a long time ago. It has been an engine developed for the Euro 6 emission standard, and it has been refined time and time again. And it doesn't really have the best reputation before it, but the new models, the mild hybrid versions, should be a bit better overall. Now, this 1-liter EcoBoost engine, mild hybrid one, has been available before the facelift came out. But previously to the facelift, it was only made available with a manual gearbox. Now, this mild hybrid 1-liter EcoBoost engine with 3 cylinders and a big turbo attached to it is available in 125 horsepower and 155 horsepower versions. We have the 155 horsepower one over here, and neither was available with an automatic gearbox. But lo and behold, we have an automatic over here, because the facelift introduced the power shift 7-speed dual clutch gearbox to the range. So now you can have this engine with an automatic, something I know a lot of people have been waiting for because they are using these cars in busy city centers. So 155 horsepower, a 7-speed dual clutch gearbox. What kind of the torque we are looking at? Well, up to 240 Newton meters of torque are available on this setup. 220 of them from the internal combustion engine and 20 more available from the starter generator that actually gives this car a hybrid nameplate, if you will. So that starter generator has 16 horsepower and 50 Newton meters of torque. Combined, the total power output you can use is 150 horsepower, 155 horsepower, and 240 Newton meters of torque. And actually, the engine does feel pretty okay for this kind of car, for this size of a car. The total weight of the Ford Focus in this configuration is under 1.4 tons, so you have more than 100 horsepower per ton in this configuration, which is like the golden ratio in my book. I've said this on a number of videos. If you have 100 horsepower per ton, you should be okay in most driving situations. You won't be eye-watering fast, you won't win Le Mans, but you will be fine in most situations. You won't have to beg your car to go faster. It will handle rather nicely. And I have to say, this car is pretty okay to drive. The engine noise isn't that great. It's still a 3-cylinder. It's not perfectly balanced, but it's okay. Most of the time you won't even notice it because you have torque very down low, thanks to that starter generator, that electric motor, and of course thanks to the turbocharger. So you won't really hear it all the time. The gearbox actually keeps you in the optimum torque range all the time, so no issues whatsoever on that front. So the car really does work pretty well. I know it's weird because it has a 1-liter engine, but to be fair, most cars in this segment, if you're talking about the Golf, the 308, the Astra, and so on, most of them use such small engines, 1 liter, 1.2 liters, 1.3 liters. You rarely see bigger engines on these cars. And if we're talking about the engine range on the Ford Focus, the EcoBoost nameplate is applied to another engine you can buy, the 2.3 liter one, with 280 horsepower available on the ST models. And that's the big daddy, if you will, in this range. But few people will actually buy that engine. This will be the workhorse, and we also have a 1.5 liter diesel available in the range that I'm guessing not a lot of people will go for. But overall, I have to say this engine and this gearbox, this combo, works rather well. The gearbox does have some stuttering in heavy traffic. It's something we've all known on all dual clutch gearboxes with dry clutches like this one. Sometimes it stutters, sometimes it doesn't really know what to do, which gear to choose, and so on. You do get an occasional jolt, but it's not a huge deal whatsoever. I much prefer this gearbox and its behavior in heavy traffic than, for example, the iZin gearbox from PSA models, which in the first 3 gears will make you actually sick while driving around town with all its stutterness and so on. As for the dynamic handling of this car, well, we don't have the ST version over here. We don't even have the ST pack, which would lower the suspension by 1 centimeter and will improve the rigidity of the suspension overall. We have the Titanium X version over here, which is a bit softer, and when I first took the car out, I felt it a bit unstable over certain bumps, but it is a comfortable ride nonetheless. We're talking about a McPherson setup up front and the torsion beam setup at the back. You can also have multi-link setup for the rear suspension depending on the model you go for. If you go for the ST, for example, you have a multi-link setup in the back. But overall, it's a comfortable ride. The suspension doesn't really send a lot of noise in the cabin, and it does its job pretty well. We have the 17-inch wheels on this car, and that means there's plenty of rubber in between the rim and the asphalt to make this car comfortable enough. I didn't really push it hard in the corners. I didn't really see the reason for that. Nobody's gonna buy this 1-liter car and go racing with it, so you better calm down if you want to do that. But in a straight line, if we're talking about overtaking and so on, up to 140 kilometers an hour, the car actually does really, really well, but you do have to be a bit more persistent with the gas pedal. Speaking of pedals, the brake pedal has a very natural feel. It's a bit more sensitive than I would prefer on a car, but it's okay. And the steering doesn't have feedback whatsoever. I don't really feel anything while pulling on the steering wheel. It feels like a driving simulator. So no feedback whatsoever coming in through the steering rack on this car. Yeah, we have to talk about the fuel consumption as well. Around town, I saw an average of 8 liters per 100 kilometers covered. On the highway, another 8 liters. And on a series of B roads, with an average speed of 70 kilometers an hour, I saw an average energy consumption. Well, I saw an average fuel consumption of around 4.5 liters per 100 kilometers covered, which is absolutely brilliant. So it's not a thirsty car, it's pretty much okay. What's also interesting is that on the facelift, we also got cylinder deactivation technology, and that means when you're driving outside city limits and the car can actually do it, it will turn off one cylinder and it will run in 2 cylinders. You won't really feel it from behind the wheel because it's a decently enough balanced engine, but apparently according to Ford, this should drop your fuel consumption a bit on the long run. Well, that remains to be seen. I didn't really have this car for an extended period of time to do all sorts of tests regarding fuel consumption with or without cylinder deactivation enabled. So what's the takeaway? Well, the rivals in this segment are pretty formidable, to say the least. We're talking about the Eternal Golf, we're talking about the Astra, the Vauxhall or Opel Astra. We're talking about the Peugeot 308, we're talking about the Mazda CX-3, we're talking about Renault Megane and so on. Plenty of strong competition for the Ford Focus. I think it's a car that's worth a look over, especially since we have this new facelift technology on board. We have a 13-inch display over here with Sync 4 on board, which actually works pretty well. I didn't have any issues with it. And we have a lot of space inside, especially in the back. I was surprised by how much room I had in the back. The car has a wheelbase of 2.7 meters, but that shows in the space offered inside. I actually fit behind myself, so to speak. So if I have the seat adjusted in my comfortable driving position, I will fit in the back. So for adults of my size, I'm 6 feet tall and about 250 pounds, will fit inside this car easily. So it's a comfortable, spacious car, doesn't really sip that much fuel. What more could you ask for? Well, you could probably ask for lower prices, but it is what it is. Over here in Eastern Europe, this car starts at roughly 23,000 euros. This model you're seeing right here with the more powerful EcoBoost engine and the automatic gearbox and the Bang & Olufsen sound system, this huge screen, the sunroof and so on, costs 36,000 euros. So not cheap at all. But then again, all cars in this segment have gone up a lot in terms of pricing. So that said, I would like to know which car would you guys buy in this segment if you were in the market for a compact hatchback right now, not a crossover. I know crossovers are all the hype right now, but we're talking about hatchbacks right now. Tell me which one you would choose and why, and how do you feel about the Ford Focus? Until next time, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and of course, don't forget to feed your passions. Ciao.